Hey, Damon, good afternoon, good morning, happy Monday, happy Martin Luther King Day. How are you, dude?
I'm doing great, Kurt, and ready to go for the week.
How was your weekend? Doing all
It
right?
was just fine. Yes,
Just
it
fine.
was.
All
Lots
right.
of football.
Lots of football. All right. So
Oh.
lots of football, lots of excitement, lots of new things. Man, we have the one, the only, my dear friend, my bestie, my partner. We might have to talk about onions, my onion freedom fighter, right?
We do.
So I've got Dr. Julia in the house. Dr. Julia, happy Monday. How are you today?
I am great. How are you?
I am I honestly cannot be any better at this very moment. There is nowhere else I'd rather be at this time than having a delightful conversation with you. It's been a little while since we connected. And so let's start here. You, hands down, in my humble opinion, have the best business name on the planet, Damon. And so, Dr. Julia, could you please share 211? Can you please share, where did 211 come from?
I can, and thank you. I appreciate that. There's a movie that, and as you get older, you start to realize that certain movies, like more and more people are like, oh, I don't know that, but hopefully people know it. But there's a movie called This Is Spinal Tap that came out. I don't even know, probably I don't even know when it came out, but it's a sort of a parody of a documentary following a band around the country, and so one of the scenes in it, they're talking about music and they're talking about amps, and one of the guys is talking about like, well, what do you do when you want to make it better and louder? And you have to see the movie to really appreciate it. I don't always do it justice, but he's like, well, we take it up to 11. And he's like, well, isn't 10 the highest one? And he's like, yeah, no, but we made it one higher on our thing. And so when my business partner and I were thinking about our company and starting it maybe 7 or 8 years ago, we thought, well, we want to have something that really demonstrates that we want to go above and beyond, and we want to take it up a notch, So this is good, but 11 is even better. And in the movie, the guy's like, well, why don't you just make 10 louder? And he's like, well, no, I want to go one up from that. So.
Oh, that's the hilarious part in that movie.
So if you're not familiar with it, you have to Google Spinal Tap, the 211 scene. It is brilliant. I love, and the guy's like, no, you can't, it's 211. You can't go to 10. It's 211. So absolutely brilliant. Just love that scene. So Julia, you and I had the honor and privilege. I had the honor and privilege of meeting you in person several years ago now. And we got together. We were part of a collective networking group, mastermind group, if you will, and just fierce marketers, solopreneurs, just trying to make the world a better place. So speaking of that, this wonderful name that you have for this company, brilliant name, 211. Share with folks, how do you and your partner make the world a better place?
How do we? Well, our real mission is I spent a lot of years in doing educational research at UCLA, and maybe for about 20 years, believe it or not, I was doing that. And what I started to realize once I was working with coaches and other people who, are in the non-academic universe, was there's a whole bunch of stuff that we know about best practices of teaching and learning that tends to stay somewhat siloed over here in the ivory towers of educational institutions like UCLA and others, when it could really be useful and helpful and beneficial to other people who are working in corporations or in other industries where people are learning every day, all the time, about all sorts of things. And so I am really passionate about taking all these lessons and all these things that we know about good teaching and learning practices and figuring out how can we implement them in real world corporate or other types of contexts so we can help people benefit from all of that collective knowledge and wisdom, which oftentimes they don't. And it's nobody's fault. I mean, there's no finger pointing going on there, right? That if you've never been exposed to something or you haven't had that opportunity to really understand or learn those things, why would you know them? But oftentimes within companies, we have people in learning and development who are amazing, but they've been maybe promoted up through the ranks of human resources or some other track. And many times they have amazing instincts and natural tendencies to do things, but there's oftentimes a whole bunch of other stuff that we can bring to them to say, hey, here are some ways that you can make your learning experiences or learning environments more effective and more efficient. And so why wouldn't you want to do that? So that's really how I hope to make the world a better place.
Well, beautiful answer. And so again, you have your PhD from UCLA. You actually were a professor at UCLA, 20 years.
I wasn't a professor. I was a researcher.
Researcher,
there, yeah.
my bad.
Like a research scientist. Yeah.
So research scientist for 20 years. And then slid into the entrepreneurial world and helping folks. I want to go back in time, and then we're going to dive into some strategies that people can apply to their workplace, leadership tips. I'm super excited to dive into this. How did you pursue your passion with being like kind of a chief learning officer, or like just really helping people to elevate their learning, helping folks like that? What really drove that passion?
Well, I think it really was. I mean, I don't want to repeat myself, but I think it's maybe a similar answer to the one I just gave. That I think that when I started to interact more with people who are outside my typical sphere that I was living in. When you work in an educational environment, you're really in a pretty homogeneous situation. And when I started, when I joined the Dory's Resident Recognized Expert group, and I started meeting all sorts of different people from all sorts of different walks of life. And I think a lot of it was during the pandemic, where we started having more and more of this type of interaction with people across the country, across the world. And I'm having conversations with people that in my day-to-day life, I wouldn't probably be bumping into. And I think we all experience that. But I started just to really realize, in having just, sometimes just casual conversations with people like you, that I'd be talking about what I do, and they'd be like, oh, wow, I didn't even know that. Wow, I've never even heard of that. Oh, I didn't even know people did that. And we're also sort of insulated in some cases, where we imagine that everybody knows what we know, and everybody is, walking around, and that's with that same knowledge and expertise. And it's only when you broaden your horizons a little bit and start interacting with people who are outside of that you really start to see, no, that's not the case. And so I saw this, in a way, a golden opportunity to help people in other contexts to leverage some of these things that I see as somewhat second nature, because I've been working in that world for so long.
Yeah, I can imagine there's just a tremendous amount of things in the educational space that when you move out into traditional business, that it's like, apples and, nectarines, because oranges aren't even close, right? Because it's the whole, I don't know, we were talking about this a little bit before we got on, the learning itself, how to learn, the process, all that kind of thing, I think is largely overlooked in business. And it's like, oh, here, digest all this stuff and you'll be fine. And we don't think about how people learn. We don't think about, how long it takes. We don't think, there's just so many things that we don't consider.
Yeah. And it's interesting, Damon. I was thinking recently about, if you think about first day of school, particularly if you're a student who, has moved around over, has moved around over, to different schools at different, times of the year. So you're the new kid who's starting school in February or something, right? And that's just a very stressful, potentially difficult situation for a lot of people. And it's really exactly the same thing as starting a new job, right? That there's all those same things that you have to be thinking about. Like, you're starting a new job, you're like, okay, I'm wondering, do I fit in here? Are there other people here like me? Do I even know what to do? Do I know where the bathroom is, or where I have to go get lunch, or all these things? And anytime that we have stuff in our head that is kind of overwhelming us or distracting us, or is not really meant to, if I'm in my math class and I'm thinking all these things like, oh my God, this teacher doesn't even like me, or I don't even know what they're doing, I don't even have a book in front of me, and all these things, you can't then learn anything, right?
Yeah.
And so it's exactly the same situation in a company or a business context. but we don't tend to make that connection. And that's really what my work is about helping people see that, we've all been to school and had those types of experiences. Most of us, unless we were lucky, never had people really telling us the best ways to study and the best ways to learn things, because unfortunately in our society we tend to hope and imagine that people will just absorb that from the atmosphere. But if you have been lucky enough to have somebody help explain to you, well, what are the best ways to learn, even if you know that, we're not always applying those things in different contexts. And in many cases, we don't really know that. And we've just kind of been brute forcing our way through it our whole life. And so to think about these things in a more intentional and thoughtful way is, I think, really important. And we can take these lessons learned from other, the traditional educational context and apply them to all sorts of other areas.
Well, I love the term brute force, because as you're talking, I'm going back in time, Damon,
Oh,
and
yeah.
I am embarrassed. I had an e-com business, and I'm thinking I had no onboarding process. It was just I had to get orders out the door. I can only imagine the position that I put folks in, just in my selfish state of mind of just get her done, get her done, get her done. And so, Julia, for small business owners out there, entrepreneurs, we target, we speak to a lot of manufacturers where they're traditionally, 5, 10, 20, 50 employees. What's a starting point? We're going to dive into, some of these learning strategies and even going into compliance, but what are some first steps that folks could, to have that environment more inviting for folks that are learning something new?
I think that you mean from the business owner perspective?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think a key thing, and it's always hard to figure out, is there one most important thing or one most important consideration? But I think one of the really important things is when you as a business owner, when you're dealing with all these day-to-day things and you've got this deep expertise and experience, and you are hiring in people to help you solve problems that you've been thinking about and dealing with for years. And you have to put yourself into the mindset of the new person who has none of that background, none of that experience, none of that context. And it's really, really critical for you to think, okay, what was it like for me when I didn't know any of this stuff? And it's really difficult for us as we develop expertise to get back into that mindset, because we've grown and we've developed, and so as you grow in your expertise, you develop competence. And we oftentimes, I'll show people a graph, and you kind of go up and you end up in this space where it's like unconscious competence. So you don't really even know all the stuff that you know. When you first start out, you're painfully aware of everything you don't know. You're like, oh my goodness. But as you grow, you start to develop competence. But then the ultimate point you get to is you don't really know what you don't know. So then when you have new people coming in, it's really easy for you to skip over things, not give them enough directions, just completely ignore really important stuff and not tell them. And they're just kind of sitting there like, what am I doing? Or you're using acronyms that they don't understand, and all manner of things like that. But that's a huge mistake that people often make, is assumptions that other people know what they know. And it's not easy to get yourself back into the mindset of a novice. And we've all done things like, taught our kids how to drive, or taught somebody, we've tried to teach somebody else something in which you have deep expertise. It's really difficult because you can't really remember all the steps, because when you drive your car, you just do it somewhat automatically. You go from point A to point B. You're not thinking, okay, now I'm going to put my foot on the brake, now I'm going to do this. You just kind of do it. And when you're teaching someone that, got to completely turn back time, right, and remember what does it feel like to think, oh my goodness, I don't even know how far do I need to stop, and all of just the different things that you need to do. So that I think is a huge thing when you are dealing with new people, or you're having new people come in and help you in your organization, that you have to model their world and really try and remember that they don't have the expertise and experience that you have. And so you have to do some things to help them, help scaffold some of that for them.
Yeah.
I absolutely love that. So, hey, we got a couple of people stopping by saying hello, Damon. So we've got Senna saying great session. We've got Usman's in the house. And so Usman says greetings. We've got MD.
Hey.
Guys, happy Monday. Thank you for stopping by. You're out there. Drop us a note. Let us know that you're here.
Let us know where you're listening from.
With Dr. Julia on LinkedIn, man. She has great content, wonderful stories that she puts out there. Julia, let's slide into, we were talking a little bit about ethics and compliance. Let's go on. I'm going to dive in there. How is this applicable for our learning strategies?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think when we think about ethics and compliance, they are big, important topics and important things, important considerations for many different organizations. And so when we think about learning, we may be an organization, we may want to teach our new employees, how to, give feedback or how to receive feedback, or, there's all manner of different things that might be good skills or practices that you want to teach them. When it comes to compliance type issues, it's even more important for us to be teaching in the right way, because oftentimes the ramifications of not following some sort of rule and not complying to certain rules and regulations can be really difficult. And again, we need to take a step back. And it doesn't really matter what we're teaching people, but there are some fundamental things that we need to always be considering when we're teaching people stuff. One of them is we have to meet people where they are. We have to understand, what do they already know, and how can we connect the new stuff to that? I mean, that's really the fundamental thing. So one of my kids went to, he was working at a supermarket, and he was 16 years old, working as a bagger at the supermarket. And he came home one day and he said, it's summer job. And he came home and he said, oh, we were doing the training, that mandatory training you have to do. And I said, so I mean, of course, I'm interested in it from many perspectives, right? So I asked him, well, what was it like? And he said, well, he said it was all about workplace harassment or something like that. And he said, but the focus of it was, when you go to a conference, make sure you don't, drink too much, or make sure you don't do this and do that. Well, he's a 16-year-old kid. He's not going to a conference for Ralph's supermarket. And so immediately it just kind of goes right over his head. So, I mean, this speaks to not just prior knowledge, but really, relevance, right? What's the reason that someone is going to be learning something? And so you need to know, why something is important, how it fits in with what you already know, but also, how is it relevant to you? And so if we really want to reach these 16-year-old kids, we got to figure out what are the types of situation that they might find themselves in the supermarket or some other world, and how can we present them with some examples so they can understand, I see, this would be a bad thing to do, obviously, because I'm a good human, I'm not going to be doing it, but also there are some reasons why. And so I think that when we think about compliance in particular and content that's around that oftentimes the impact of not doing something well or correct or right is going to be bad. And so we need to pay even more attention to how can we make sure that people learn these things. And we were talking earlier before the show about things like, I mean, this is a simple example, but relevant. You go on an airplane and you watch over and over and over again the flight attendant telling you the emergency drill and telling you where the life jackets are and telling you on some flights, there's a lifeboat if it's a big enough, like international flight, all the different protocols and procedures. But if you haven't actually done it and you haven't actually put the life jacket on and you haven't actually had to look and figure out where is it under your seat? Is it between your seat? Is it somewhere else? That in a moment of extreme stress and panic, it's likely that, very few of us would actually be able to do that, even if we've seen it hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times. So when we think about teaching people about compliance topics, we have to be thinking, okay, how can we help both connect it to what they know, make it relevant to them, help them understand why it's important, and also give them some time and opportunities to practice it and to, be, and, we've all done fire drills at school or, within our company or at hotels, they do them sometimes, but, and that's a great, that's a great practice, but we need to be doing that with all sorts of other topics as well, other practices, not just, fire drills.
Yeah. And I think for where Kurt and I are at in with a lot of manufacturers, there is so much danger, so much opportunity to be hurt by equipment. And even when in a previous life, when I did some work in the oil fields, I mean, when you talk about safety is so critical. And you talk about compliance, right? And everything down to the types of shoes you wear, the clothes you put on, the way you walk almost in some of these situations makes a difference for compliance. And like you said, a great example about your son. If I'm someone new on the job, how do I have to be taught at that level? Or if I've been on the job for 20 years, I almost think that the 20-year person is harder because they get so comfortable. Because I've seen people moving things that are tons, 10, 20 tons, moving it around and forget that it is 10 or 20 tons and crush things. And thankfully not people, but it's just, we get this level of comfort because we're doing something all the time. Like you said, just like learning, we understand. But in manufacturing, it's so easy to work around very dangerous things and get comfortable. And when we can't be comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And I love that example too, Damon, because I remember doing a study once back at UCLA where we were helping teachers, develop some new practices. And we had teachers with all levels of experience. So some brand new teachers and some veteran 20 plus year teachers. And I remember thinking, well, my initial thought was, oh, well, I bet the veteran teachers will be better at this. But no, for exactly the same reason that you say, that the veteran teachers were so kind of stuck in their ways or so confident in what they'd been doing for all these years, and it was really second nature. They weren't really interested in any new strategies or techniques that might have been useful, whereas the ones who had less experience were a little bit more open to that and open to receiving it. So and I think the other thing too, when it comes to having a lot of expertise, is just like we have to meet people, new people where they are, we also have to meet the experienced people where they are. We cannot be, giving people the same thing every single year, because then they just zone out, right? So if you're saying, okay, well, our industry is telling us that every 2 years we have to give such and such a training, okay, then you got to make sure that how can you, have some element of refresher for folks who maybe haven't seen something, but also how can you, bring them up a little bit more to the next level and not just have them see the same thing, because as soon as they see that, their eyes glaze over, they're not paying attention, and they may just as well have not been there. So it's anytime you're teaching someone something, you want to make it as effective and efficient as possible. I mean, that's really the point. And doing that means you've got to kind of turn the camera around and think, okay, what do I really need to be thinking about in this context? What are the variables? What are the factors that are going to influence whether or not people are going to learn what I want them to learn or they're not? And then once we think about that, we can work on improving it. But we have to think about that context first.
Yeah, and gosh, you guys are making such great points. And the thing is that, like, if you don't have critical mass, or a major corporation where we've had the budgets and the bandwidth, and we can make this either fun or entertaining, or like somehow make elevate the engagement, where we're like, hey, I have 20 employees and I'm doing my best. Like, what's any tips or I don't want to put you on the spot, but any tips or suggestions for like the small company? I like exactly what you're saying, Damon. I'm thinking of like multiple. I just saw a guy at the gym yesterday, and he changed careers. He got out of manufacturing because like he was dealing with it was a small manufacturer. It was a client of mine years and years and years ago, and they had like really hot parts, and it somehow it slipped down into his glove, and like he got severely burnt on his arm. He's like, man, very conscientious guy, did everything safe, and still had like a pretty severe situation. He changed careers because of it. So for like smaller companies, Julia, do you have any tips, suggestions? Like, how do we keep that small crowd engaged, whether the newbie or the long term? Any tips there?
Yeah, well, I think that I might come at this from a slightly different perspective because I think, you mentioned something about, okay, if you're a small company, you don't have a big budget and you can't make things fun and cool. And I think that oftentimes we swing too far into that territory, and we chase the shiny thing, and so we're always thinking about like, oh, everybody's telling us we have to do, TikTok videos, or everyone's telling us that we have to do this or that to teach people things.
Right.
And my philosophy is on that okay, let's always begin with, what do you want to teach someone, and who is the person that you're teaching it to, or who's the group that you're teaching it to, but begin with, what is it that you want to get them to understand. And this is where all of that, prior knowledge stuff comes in, because it really is there's never going to be a it's always best to use video, or it's always best to use this, or it's always best to use this strategy. Oftentimes the most effective learning strategies are really simple. And so if you are a small organization, it's not going to be a deficiency. It's probably oftentimes going to be more effective, because you're going to have to be maybe a little bit more creative and innovative, or you're just going to think, okay, this is the thing that I need to teach somebody. Some other organization might have some shiny video, but actually it might just be the best strategy to have everyone gather around your bench and show them something. And so I always caution people against, thinking that, technology or some kind of innovative thing is going to be the answer, because it really isn't. It's just going to depend. Like if you have somebody who has expertise in, auto mechanics or something like that, then, and you want to introduce them to a new tool, or I don't know, clearly I do not have expertise in this area. So, but some new thing that, if they already have a lot of expertise, then the way that you need to teach them is, you can just say, hey, Damon, that drill that you usually use for such and such a thing? Well, there's this cool new one. It's just like that, but it's got this different widget. And that's it, right? You don't need to go into any deep thing. But if you're going to teach me about that, you're going to have to use a whole different strategy, right? But the reason that you're doing that is because I don't have any foundational understanding or knowledge about that, whereas Damon does. So your strategy is going to be different. And so I think that, when you're any size organization, what you really need to think about is, what is the stuff that you want people to learn, and how can you do that the most effective and efficient way, given that you want to make sure that people are, motivated to do it, and they're, paying attention to you, and they feel like it's relevant, and they have time and opportunity to practice whatever it is that you're helping them do. But we don't ever want the shiny technology to come first, because that's always a mistake.
Yeah.
Well,
but talking about that and shiny technology, I mean, one of the things, and this was years ago already, that we learned about safety in manufacturing was, we went off to DuPont, actually has one, and I don't know if they still do, but at the time they were making a lot of explosives and other things that are very dangerous. So their safety record was phenomenal in the practices they had to use. And we went out and studied it and did their courses and implemented it in our factories. And the biggest factor to improving safety in a manufacturing plant is making sure that people will walk up to someone else and ask them, hey, are you sure that's safe? That's the only thing, because and talking about it every day and making sure that we're all thinking about it every day, because we will get into our own thing, and it doesn't matter what we're doing at home. We're doing something around the home, and I have to move this. So I pick it up. Next thing you know, I've hurt my back, or I've hurt something else, because I wasn't thinking about it. But in a setting like an industrial setting, other people, you're working around people most of the time, people all around, and keeping your eyes open and going, hey, Damon, you sure you want to do that? Or can I help you with that? Or do we need to get the right, tool to do that, or something else? Because it's a huge, and I saw it take safety and go from, on a scale like 75, 80% reduction in recordable work injuries, just because people are thinking about and talking about it. And these are very experienced people. Like you said, if you don't do something a little bit differently, they're just going to look at the training and go, oh, I've seen this before. And then they're thinking about lunch.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that, Damon. And I think it's a perfect example of, we can pick that, we could strip away the manufacturing context, and you could put it in any other area, because what you're really talking about is you want people to feel comfortable in making a mistake, and they're not going to be punished for it.
Yep.
You want people to feel comfortable in it's essentially like asking questions or pointing out to somebody, or that it's that the culture has been developed as such that if someone says to you, like, hey, Damon, I think that, that looks like it's too heavy for one person to lift, let's help you, that becomes just normalized, that type of situation. And there's not, I worked on some training for a company once all around safety, around like things like ladders and like OSHA compliance and things. And one of the things that, people would do sometimes, it was like, oh, they have these competitions of like, let's not have any, like, how many days can we have without an accident, those kind of things. But if you frame that in such a way that it makes people not want to report things or not want to do that, then all of a sudden you don't really have no accidents. You've just got nothing that's actually been reported or brought up. But if you flip that around and think, okay, well, what you really want is, if there is an incident or something that happens, you do want people to be able to report that and feel comfortable, because maybe there's some other, context or other situation in the environment that is leading people to have that accident or leading that unsafe practice. And so if people are aware of it, they might be like, oh my goodness, we didn't realize we didn't have the right size ladder for this thing, or whatever it might be. And so it's really that issue you're talking about is about developing this context in which mistakes and any kind of thing like that it's okay, and it's normalized, and you're not going to be in trouble if someone points it out to you. And it's huge in any context, because if I feel, if you're studying for a test or something, if you feel like afraid to ask somebody because you think you're going to feel bad because they're going to think like, what an idiot you are, you don't know this, then you're not going to ask, and you're not going to try and get help, and you're not going to try and improve because you don't feel comfortable in doing that. I love that.
So, and Julia, I love the line that you said, begin with the end in mind. It goes back to like the Stephen Covey 7 Habits. And so I love what you're saying. So regardless of size, think of the outcome that you want, and I think, again, I'll go back to my previous life. My mistake was not understanding or realizing the more successful that person is, the more successful the company, the whole, can be. So I love what you're saying there. I want to go here. It is said, or it was told me, that when when you get goosebumps, like you're just working with a client and you're just like, man, I feel like I'm in the zone, and you're like, you kind of get those goosebumps, like this is really resonating, it's really hitting home, and you see a wonderful deliverable or a wonderful result. Could you share with us, what are those moments for you? What are like those goosebump moments where you just feel like, man, I'm just, I know you're from across the pond. I'm going to throw a baseball analogy. When you just feel like you're hitting a home run with a client and you just see that result and that outcome, what's an example, or what does that look like for you?
Well, the first thing that came into my mind was, and this is less about me and more about somebody else, but I'll say it anyway, that I was working on a big project for a utility company, a water and power company, and the company has a training facility where they have a lot of folks who have been worked their way up the ranks and are now training the new folks. And this is training people who are going to be the water utility workers. It's a very entry level type job. It's a lot of digging holes and for pipes and stuff. And so when I first was up there, I was thinking to myself, and falling victim to this expert blind spot issue, I was thinking, well, how hard could that be? Like digging a hole or, doing these things like, and so I was doing a lot of observation and watching these different folks teaching these new, and I'm going to say guys because I think it was all guys, but then I was interviewing these different trainers. And so one of the things that I was thinking about was all these folks are exactly the folks I was talking about at the beginning, that they're really expert, they have a ton of experience, but they've never really had any, direct instruction or help in thinking about how would you teach a new person how to do this. And so when I was interviewing them, what I was just struck by, and really it made me smile and gave me some goosebumps, I'll say, is I was talking to one of the guys, and I was saying, well, how do you, when you're talking about, holding different tools and stuff, like, I mean, how are you doing that? And a lot of the other guys had just kind of given me these basic answers. And he said, here's what I do. I said, I had this guy the other day and he was holding the whatever tool it was in this kind of awkward way. And I was asking him about his hobbies, and he said he was a drummer. And I said, okay, well, how do you hold your drumsticks? Like, think about that, and I don't really know about drumming, but so the guy was kind of then like holding this wrench or whatever tool it was, like in this way that he said, okay, so when you think about these tools, don't be like, like this, like gripping it so hard. Like, think about how is it that you hold your drumsticks, and it's a lot softer and kind of, and then he said to me, he's like, so I want to connect what I'm teaching him to something that he already knows. And it was like, wow, like that. Yes. As I said earlier, that's one of the fundamental things. And here he is just spontaneously saying like that was his instinct to do that. And it was so great to hear so many stories like that from these guys, that they really did have really good ideas. And it's almost like they had just stumbled upon them. And what was fun for me was then I could tell them like, yeah, all these things you're doing, they're all great. And then even once I could tell them that, it allowed them to, in a more intentional way, do that more in the future, because it was almost a happy accident that they were doing it in the first place. But then when I could say, yeah, that is really useful for this reason, then it just, kind of takes off. So that's just fun to see things like that.
So when you and I met, I absolutely love that. So when you and I met, we were talking about before we went on, I took just pages of notes. It was like a master class. I just loved every minute of it. And if I'm not mistaken, you taught me there might be a myth. Like, so most people learn, like you're either a visual learner or you're like, what are the alternatives, right? Like that's
kinesthetic or auditory or whatever. Yes. No.
And it drives you crazy. Just like, yes. So let's like right here and now, because how many times, well, I'm a such and such.
Let's squash that myth. Yes.
Just walk us through that, will you please?
We'll do a speed round of that. Yeah. So we hear that all the time. People are always talking about that. And so the reason it's bad. So first of all, it's not true, right? And I already gave an example of this, right? If you're teaching Damon about the new drill, you don't need to show him a video. You don't need to draw him a diagram. You could just tell him, because he already has expertise. For me, I don't know anything. Yes, you need to sit down and give me a video. Yes, you need to hold my hand and show me how to do it. That's not because I'm a visual learner and Damon is a different kind of learner. It's because we've got something different in our head, right? So if you bump into somebody in the street and they ask you for directions, and if they've never been to your town before, then you need to say, okay, you could draw them a map and you could point out some landmarks and stuff. And so they'd need something, because they wouldn't be able to hold all those directions in their head. They'd need a cue of some kind. Yeah. Whereas if it was you bump into Damon and he lives in your town and he's like, hey, Kurt, where's the new coffee shop? You were like, oh yeah, it's right by where Blockbuster used to be, or something. Right. Like that's all you need to say, right? And again, that's not because he's a different kind of learner than I am. Right. It's because he has more prior knowledge in his head. And the reason it's really damaging for this myth to kind of persist is that it can really discourage a growth mindset. Because if I've been told or I believe that I am a visual learner or something, then if somebody wants to teach me, I don't know, dancing or something, I might think, all right, well, I guess I can't do that unless I have some video or some visual medium, or if I think that if someone says, oh, you're not a math person, or any of those types of things, right? That it's really damaging to our motivation to learn and grow, because we in a way turn off that tap before we've even tried it, right?
Mhm.
And so when we try and put people into these different buckets, we really are doing people a disservice, because we are in a way kind of just telling people, yeah, don't even try that because it's not for you, or don't even try that, you're not that kind of person. And why would you ever want to do that? So when we think about teaching people things and learning, we've got to, it's difficult, right? When we're learning anything, and Kurt, my mantra is learning is hard, right? Learning is hard. That's okay. But again, we don't ever want people to imagine that they can, pick up a guitar and learn how to play it in, an hour, right? And if someone tells you that, then no. But if we can help people to understand that, yes, it's going to take some time and effort to learn and practice and get better at something, okay, and it's worth it. And the way that it's going to work for you, we might have preferences, just like I don't like onions, and some people might, right? But that we certainly have preferences for some people like to use e-readers and some people don't. But that doesn't mean, right, that preference has anything to do with the efficacy of how something is going to get into your head. That really has to do with what you already know, how motivated you are, and all these other things, versus someone telling you, yeah, you're a kinesthetic learner, so you're going to have to learn math by jumping around the room or something and acting it out.
Well, I want to tie that in with the gentleman. The reason I asked that, and we've talked about that before, I wanted to ask that because I love the example you gave with the gentleman with the drumsticks. And I was a drummer 100 years ago, so I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant example. So the thing is, it's, I want to say, like, not necessarily scalable, but like he understood the person, dove, had the care, conscientious, aptitude to ask the right question. Oh, you're a drummer? We'll treat it like, then maybe he's conscious enough. Hey, I'm going to ask the next person. Asking for a friend. Is there a line of like almost slipping into like micromanaging, or like, or like holding somebody's hand too much compared to understanding somebody? Like, how do you meet somebody where they're at without like, dude, can you back off? Like, you're taking it a little too far. You know what I'm asking? Like, how do where's the balance there?
Well, I mean, I think part of what you might be asking is in a way, how is this practice of getting to figure out where people are, how is that perhaps replicable or scalable? Is that sort of what you're asking?
Yeah, that more so like, how do you not come across like you're micromanaging or like holding your hand, like really, like how do you find that line of like not tipping into like a micromanaging type environment? Does that make sense? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and I mean, a lot of it is going to be about listening and also about experience. So, when you're teaching, let's say you were teaching a course, like my husband teaches biology at UCLA.
Sure.
He has so much experience and understanding of the sort of typical student trajectory as they are developing knowledge in the areas that he's teaching. Obviously, everyone's not the same, but most people who come into his class are, have a similar background and have similar motivations for being in his course and all of that. And so he can draw on this experience. And, so he knows, okay, in the past, people tend to struggle with this concept, or in the past, I've had a lot of people always have questions about this. So I'm going to spend a bit of extra time on that. But then even like when you're in a live in-person environment and you're doing that, you might be seeing everyone's eyes kind of glaze over, or you might be seeing a lot of people like, oh yeah, and they're writing stuff down, and you can in real time get some feedback as to what's working, what's not working. And I think even if you were in let's say the water and power company context, you just have to be paying attention to, even if you're teaching a small group of new trainees, are you noticing like people making the same mistakes, or are you noticing like a lot of the same questions, or are you noticing that people seem to be getting really bored at a certain section that you're talking about, and that's where you can make some of these adjustments, or even just talk to people and figure out maybe you just happen to have a little cohort of folks who are new, who already know what you're trying to teach them. And so you could figure that out and think, okay, well then we don't really need to spend a lot of time on this. Let's move on to the next thing. And so it's trying to, in a way, get some of that formative type feedback from people. And, I'm not talking about making things, individually customized, but just trying to get a sense of, just like when you're giving a presentation, or anything, you can kind of read the room, right? You could think, okay, well, I'm talking about this. Everyone's kind of like nodding and they seem like they're into it. And so okay, that seems good. If everyone's just like, what? Then maybe I need to switch up. And that's where, again, having expertise is really valuable, because if you have deep expertise, you are able to pivot and adapt and switch off and think, okay, this strategy is not working. You know what? I'm going to go to this one over here. And that's, when you have someone who's a novice instructor and novice teacher, one of the downsides of that is that they don't tend to have a lot of other alternative strategies if things aren't working. And I think about this, with my mother, if she's talking to somebody who doesn't understand what she's saying, maybe they don't speak English as their first language or whatever it might be, and she just says like the same thing louder. It's like, well, so in that case, the up to 11 is not going to work out. It's like she's got to change her strategy. It's like if you keep saying the same thing and the person's like not getting it, it's like, okay, I got to see what's behind door number 2.
Right.
And you can only do that if you have some other things in your tool belt.
That's too funny. I don't know how many times I've been in that situation where someone does that very thing.
Right. Right. Guess what? Not working.
I've been guilty of, like, no, I said, right. So, all right. I know, gosh, Julie, we're coming into time a little bit here. Hey, we've got a few people here coming from Philippines. So we've got Sel here. We've got
we've got an international.
We've got international. We've got our friend here from Nigeria. We've got our friend here saying, hey, hello, Mr. Damon, Mr. Kurt, Miss Julia, great topic to talk about. So guys, again, drop a note in the chat box. Let us know that you're here. Drop Julia a note on LinkedIn. Connect with her. She has all sorts of wonderful information. Let's wind down on how about marketing, if you don't mind. We love helping people grow their sales, grow their business. Little tagline. If we did a jam session probably a year and a half ago, we called it "How do you out teach the competition?" Julia, a lot of these strategies are really, whether we're onboarding a client, onboarding an employee, teammate, we're trying to elevate a teammate, whether it's safety, instructional, whatever it might be. How can we talk a little bit about how are some of these strategies applicable for like talking to customers, talking to our clients, trying to attract new business? Any thoughts there?
I think that, anytime you're talking to a client, one of the things you need to figure out is what is it that they already know, or what is it that they need? And, I'm not a salesperson by any means, but, it really is a teachable moment, because, and maybe you've got somebody who could use your product, but they don't really know what it does, or they don't really know what it is. And again, we think we can go back to thinking about problems to solve and some of those end goals. That if you have a sense of, okay, this person's biggest pain point is, I don't know, employee retention or something like that. Like that's what they're really struggling with. And if there's some product or service that you have that's going to address that, but it's helping to make that connection. But I could also imagine in a situation where you're selling an actual product, like I think you and I think it was Nicole, is that her name? We talked about that, about if you've got a new refrigeration system or something that you're trying to sell to somebody. Well, one of the things you're going to want to do is figure out, well, how is it different, or how is it better than what they already have, or how is this thing going to solve a problem that they have? But you have to not be talking about it in such a technical way, perhaps, that might not be, where they're coming from. Maybe that, and again, you've probably got all different types of stakeholders who might be involved in a sales type conversation. And so it's thinking about, okay, which person am I talking to? Is the person I'm talking to most concerned about money, or most concerned about, efficiency, or most concerned about, I don't know, longevity of the machine or whatever it might be, and to help them understand how this particular product that you have is going to help them achieve that goal. But again, it goes back to what we were talking about with Damon about, just listening to people and figuring out, where are people coming from? What do they already know? And again, almost like anticipating some questions that they have. And again, that comes from you having expertise in your area and trying to model the world of that other person and figure out, what is it that they need you to explain, because oftentimes it's not everything. You can figure out pretty quickly, okay, they already know about this aspect of it. The thing they really need to know is some other thing.
And just as you were talking, thank you. Phenomenal answer.
Yeah.
So again, a great takeaway is just being that fierce educator, understanding where your ideal client is at. What are like you said, what are the questions that they have and how can you present them? If you're familiar with Lululemon, I know you have 3 boys, but are you familiar? So I have a teenage daughter. Like if you have a teenage daughter, it's all about Lululemon, right? So, how that gentleman, he's quite eccentric, but the gentleman that founded Lululemon, he never hired a salesperson. He strictly hired educators.
Interesting.
And what he did is when he first launched the company, Vancouver, it was like 2000 or whatever. He went out. He was hiring professionals. He hired women with law degrees, financial planners, teachers. And what he did is he did high level training. And so when you walked into the very first Lululemon store, all the way up to anyone today, and when you walk on the floor, they're not salespeople. They are called educators. And
interesting. Yeah.
It's a brilliant business model on how this guy was just so unapologetically committed to educating. And so I love what you're saying. But so I'm kind of throwing an example at you. What are your thoughts as you're kind of hearing this from that company? What are your thoughts?
I love it. I love it because again, I'm not a sales expert or a marketing expert, but I think that I personally am not excited about someone trying to persuade me to do something or to buy something that I don't want, or but I like the idea of somebody listening and trying to learn about, okay, well, what is it that what's the problem you're trying to solve and how can I help you solve it, rather than how can I kind of persuade you or encourage you or force you to I don't know, spend some money that you don't really want to be spending. And so I like that I can imagine. I mean, I've been into the store a few times. I think most of the times I've bought stuff from there, it's been online. But I haven't had that experience. But I think that having it's just a different mindset, right? And it's really trying to think of how can that salesperson meet you and think, okay, what is the problem you're trying to solve? What are you looking for? And how can I help you? And if I can't help you, then okay, you can go to another store. But I like that. I like that mindset.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, our guest from Friday, one of his Joe Sullivan from Gorilla 76, we had one of his employees on our show last June, and she and we talked about, she was actually out of college. She worked at Lululemon, and so we brought that up, and she goes, "You know what? That's funny you're saying that. I had 6 weeks of training before like she ever talked to a customer." Yes. And when you think about retail, you walk into like whatever, Target, Nordstrom's, whatever, your local retail store is. Like she never talked to a customer without 6 weeks of training on how to be an educator. And so I really admire, I feel like that, she built a hugely successful $1 billion company with that mindset. So I guess if he did it, maybe us solopreneurs and our smaller companies, we could do it as well. So.
And I think that speaks to what Damon was talking about with, I think it was DuPont, right? That signals to people, if you're spending 6 weeks training people, that signals to them that you care about them. And it signals to them that you take it seriously, that there's real information to learn. And, there are companies, I think it's like Cane's Chicken or something like that, that has very similar thing where the amount of training they have, I think as the outsider, you might think, really? They're having that much training to work at like the chicken restaurant? But on the flip side, they have huge retention, they have huge employee satisfaction, and they have a lot of employees who stay and get promoted up through the ranks. And that's a powerful signal of a company that's doing something right when it comes to learning.
That's a great. I just listened to I listened to Guy Raz, How I Built This, his podcast every week, and he just they just had Kane's
Oh,
chicken.
they did? Oh, I'll have to listen to that. Yeah.
Last week, and again, Guy started it completely from scratch. He was fresh out of college and just dedicated to that customer success. Julie, I don't want to keep you. Before we went live, we can close out on this. You gave a wonderful example, and I apologize I didn't bring this up sooner. You talked about like an example with an armored car, and then you kind of like that crisis moment where like, geez, I haven't been prepared. And you gave like the famous, here in the States, the Sully story. Just if we could close, I'm sorry to keep you, but I'd just love for you to just that was a powerful story. Just share that one quick, and then we'll wind down.
Yeah. So we were talking about compliance and how oftentimes we give people training and on procedures and protocols, but it's not really at the right time, or they haven't had time to practice it. And so oftentimes when I'm doing presentations and training, I'll show a clip of a movie, and it's two guys, they're driving an armored car, they've got a bunch of money, like millions of dollars in the back, and they're dropping off a small amount of money at some warehouse or something. And so two guys are sitting in the front, the other guy's gone into the warehouse, but the majority of the money is still in the truck. And all of a sudden, the guy inside has been like taken hostage, or there's something comes over the radio, like some bad stuff is happening. And the guy who's in the driving seat, he's like, okay, oh shoot, I know there's a protocol for this. And he's like looking on the visor of the truck, and he's like, I got to call it in. No, we got to drive away. And so in the moment that hopefully never happens, but can happen, that he was supposed to have been trained on. He was trained on it like, a year ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was, never had to actually do it. And so now he's in that situation. He doesn't know what to do.
Yeah.
And so if we're going to have people, learning things and learning protocols and procedures that could, hopefully we hope they don't, but could happen, we need to give them the opportunity to practice. And then, someone like Sully, here's a guy who has deep experience and expertise, has certainly done simulations, but he's able to sort of pull all those things together in a way that ultimately was successful. But we need to have these opportunities to practice. Otherwise, that really important procedure or protocol is sort of in one ear and out the other.
Yeah. Great example.
Okay, that and Sully saved dozens, hundreds, or whatever. I don't know the number, but tons.
I don't either. Yeah, a lot. Yeah,
a lot of catch the movie, Google it, correct me on the number, but wonderful examples. Julia, first off, let's see if it does it work. Damon, does it work? Oh, it doesn't do it when we go live, right? So there it is. So I cannot express my thanks, my gratitude to you from the bottom of my heart for I know how busy you are. You have a lot going on in your world. And so thank you for taking the time to share with myself and Damon and our crowd out here today. I want to wish you and your family just a wonderful, incredible 2025 and just wonderful, great things out ahead. Damon, your thoughts, takeaways from this wonderful conversation with Dr. Julia today?
No, it's great having you here today, Dr. Julia, and just learning from you and to really help open our minds a bit more about the learning process. Thank you.
Thank you. It's always a pleasure and a delight to see both of you, and we'll do it again.
All right.
So as we close out, connect with Julia on LinkedIn. Go to it's 211 Solutions, I believe, is your website.
Yeah,
is that right?
Yeah.
211solutions.com. Anywhere else that folks can find you, Julia? Anywhere else?
Those are the two main places. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you.
Connect with Julia on LinkedIn. Stop by her website. She has all sorts of wonderful things going on. Dr. Julia, hang out with us 1 second. And Damon, as we love to say every week, man, first off, filled with gratitude for Julia, filled with gratitude for our crowd out here today. And just go out and be someone's inspiration, because like you guys have no clue. I don't want to say it like that. That sounds wrong, right? But how inspiring Julia is to all of us. And so, again, connect with her. And we wish you an amazing, incredible week. Stay warm for those of us that are freezing. And we'll talk to you.
Have a great week.
We have a great guest on Friday. We'll see you Friday.